The first time Elias Garrett mentioned his plan, three men actually dropped what they were holding: a bucket, a saw, and one man's pipe. That's how absurd the idea sounded in Rockbridge County in the summer of 1883, a place where winter heating was as settled and sacred as scripture. While his neighbors measured firewood stacks against the coming frost, Garrett walked the hillside behind his cabin, pacing slow circles and studying how the sun struck the slope from morning to mid-afternoon. He wasn't checking grazing land or looking for a spring. He was searching for something no one else in the Blue Ridge had ever considered: a way to heat a cabin without burning half the forest. He wasn't a dreamer. He was a blacksmith and mason by trade, a man used to solving problems with muscle, fire, and stone. And he carried a scar inside his chest that pushed him toward invention. The winter of 1882, when pneumonia left him coughing blood beside a smoke-heavy hearth that never warmed the room enough to save him from weeks of fever. Most people would have thanked God and recovered. Garrett took notes. He noticed how smoke from stoves felt heavy in tight cabins during winter, how the air tasted harsh after long nights tending fires, how cold lingered in the lungs in a way wood heat never fully drove out. He became obsessed with the idea that clean air mattered as much as warmth, perhaps even more. So when he claimed his land along the South River, he brought not just tools, timber, and seed, but an intention: build a winter system that didn't choke him with smoke or bind his life to the stove from dawn till dusk. While his neighbors boasted about new stovepipe fittings and improved flues, Garrett was still digging, carving a trench that began at a south-facing slope and traveled directly toward the underside of his cabin. A 40-foot tunnel, sloping down then rising again, a strange U-shape carved into the earth. To the passing eye, it looked like a rabbit burrow scaled for giants. To Garrett, it was a machine, a system meant to pull sun-warmed air into the ground, let the soil temper it, and deliver that steady warmth into his cabin. Word spread quickly, and with each retelling, the laughter grew. "Heat don't run downhill," someone shouted. "Even smoke ain't that foolish," another said. They weren't cruel. They were confident. Confident in what every Blue Ridge family believed. Warm air rises, cold air sinks, and that's the order of the world. But the world has more rules than most people notice. Garrett had learned them from years of laying stone foundations, watching root cellars stay cool in summer and strangely mild in winter, and seeing how deep soil never surrendered its stable temperature. He wasn't rejecting tradition, he was listening to the land. So while men rebuilt hearths and split oak for winter, Garrett kept cutting the earth open, one shovel at a time, one stone at a time. Mockery rolled down the trail every few days, but he barely looked up. He had felt winter's breath nearly kill him once. He didn't intend to give it another chance. And the truth was this: the idea everyone mocked held a secret no one else in the county had ever imagined. A secret that would reveal itself when the mountains unleashed the coldest week in living memory. Garrett's first excavation unfolded through June heat, thick enough to soften pine pitch. He carved a clean 40-foot run from the hillside mouth straight toward the cabin foundation, a neat, level trench, 2 feet high and 2 feet wide. Simple, straight, efficient, and completely wrong. The first hard rain exposed every flaw. Water seeped through the clay walls, pooled across the bottom, and turned the lower section into a slow-moving ribbon of mud. Condensation clung to the rough earth. The entire run smelled of wet soil and stagnation. Nothing like the clean flow he envisioned. Most men would have paused and given up. Garrett took a willow stick and began measuring. He checked puddle depths every few feet, marked the floor depressions, tracked where condensation collected. The level floor was the enemy. Water could not escape, and air could not flow without dragging moisture along with it. Nature had spoken again, and he listened. The next morning, he recut the entire trench with careful precision. The first 22 feet dropped at 3/4 of an inch per foot, ending in a shallow gravel sump. From there, a small French drain carried water toward daylight. The final 18 feet rose gently toward the cabin, completing the natural circuit that would allow warmed air to climb without any mechanical help. When Tom Rigsby saw the new gradient marked out by stakes, he nearly laughed himself off his wagon. Air ain't a mule, Eli. It ain't gonna climb just because you told it to. But Garrett wasn't relying on mule logic. He was relying on the simple fact that warm interior air always rises. And when warm air escapes from the top of a cabin, cooler air must replace it. He was building that replacement. Once the new slope was cut, he began lining the tunnel with dry-laid fieldstone, choosing smooth stones to reduce drag. He locked the ceiling stones into a gentle arch to withstand soil pressure. Then he applied a thin lime sand coat, just enough to smooth the surface without smothering the stone's ability to absorb and release heat. At the hillside entrance, he built a small wooden collector box painted black inside and fitted with a mica window, scavenged from an old stove door. Neighbors joked about his sun window for ground-dwelling critters, but Garrett simply kept working. Mica let sunlight in. Black paint absorbed the heat. Warm air began the journey downward. Inside the cabin foundation, he cut a vent in the stone, fitted it with a hand-forged damper, and opened a small escape hole near the roofline. With that, the circuit was complete. Sun-warmed air in, tempered air out. A constant flow driven by the natural rise of warm air. In late October, he tested the system by lighting a sulfur match at the collector mouth. The smoke threaded into the tunnel without hesitation and emerged minutes later from the cabin vent. His thermometer inside rose from 46 degrees to 60 by dusk, without a single stick of wood burned. He didn't celebrate. He simply wrote it down. Because early success meant nothing. Winter was coming, and the mountains had a test waiting that no theory could predict. By late autumn, the valley had stopped mocking Elias Garrett, not because they believed in his tunnel, but because the sheer scale of it left them unsure whether to laugh or worry for his sanity. The wooden collector gleamed on sunny days. The stone-lined trench had vanished beneath fresh soil. Only 2 openings remained. The mica-faced intake on the hillside and the vent in the cabin wall. To anyone else, it looked like a pointless underground pipe. To Garrett, it was a deliberate machine, a stone lung breathing warmth from the earth. Inside the cabin, he recorded temperatures with the discipline of a man who had nearly died from cold the winter before. He hung his thermometer away from the stove, trusting only neutral space. The readings didn't lie. Whenever sunlight struck the hillside, the cabin warmed without combustion. Not hot, but comfortably, steadily warm. Neighbors noticed strange things. Garrett wasn't hauling wood like he used to. No stove smoke drifted from his chimney on sunny afternoons. He didn't seem anxious when the first frost arrived. They asked questions in half-curious, half-wary tones. So what's it doing now? You really think you'll make it through without burning? You sure that tunnel ain't gathering bad air? Garrett answered without frustration. It works on principles we don't usually pay attention to. By the end of October, the system was doing what it was built to do. Under sunlight, the mica collector heated incoming air as it entered the tunnel. By the time that air traveled through the stone-lined path, it stabilized around 60 degrees, a temperature the cabin walls could easily hold. It wasn't magic. It was mass, sunlight, slope, and patience. Doc Abernathy, who had helped apply the lime wash, visited and stood at the cabin door. He held his hands near the vent and nodded slowly. This is cleaner air than most sick rooms I visit. Garrett simply kept working, adjusting, measuring, refining. He wasn't after comfort alone. He was trying to avoid another winter trapped beside a choking hearth. By December, the numbers were undeniable. Sunny days brought the interior to 65 degrees. Cloudy days held above 50 at night. A single coal bed for cooking kept the cabin warm. The neighbor's skepticism began shifting toward nervous curiosity. What if he was right? What if the valley's understanding of heat was incomplete? But the true test hadn't come yet. The winter had been ordinary so far, cold but familiar. Nothing remarkable. The mountains were waiting. And when they chose to reveal their full fury, Every man in the valley would learn whose understanding of heat, air, and earth had been wisdom, and whose had been assumption. If stories like this make you appreciate the forgotten ingenuity of people who trusted the land more than tradition, consider subscribing to Frontier Tales of America. Your support helps us uncover the history that still shapes our world today. February 1899 began like any other winter month. Sharp winds, thick ice on the river, and cabins glowing with steady wood fires. But on the 10th day of the month, the sky changed. Clouds pressed flat against the mountains, heavy and gray. The wind went still. Birds vanished. The temperature fell so fast it felt as if the world exhaled and forgot to breathe back in. By nightfall, a new kind of cold settled over the valley. A cold that pushed against doors and windows as if it wanted inside. Then it deepened. Staunton dropped to 12 below zero. Highland County plunged toward 29 below. People could hardly process the numbers. Frost began forming on interior walls. Buckets beside glowing stoves froze solid. Caleb McBride, proud owner of the latest parlor stove, threw oak into the fire until his stove glowed red. But by dawn, his family woke shivering under every quilt they owned. Ice formed on the bedposts. Tom Rigsby's massive hearth devoured wood faster than he could split it. Flames roared. Sparks climbed the chimney. But the cabin struggled to stay above 40 degrees. The clay around his chimney cracked from the thermal shock, creating new drafts that sliced through the room. Mary Ellen Corbett's reliable cook stove, the one that had kept her family warm for decades, failed almost instantly. The stove swung between blazing hot and chilling cold as fuel burned faster than she could feed it. A layer of ice formed in her wash basin despite being placed close to the heat. Every home in the valley, every stove, every hearth, every method tested by generations failed under the weight of the Arctic outbreak, except one. Garrett's cabin stayed between 58 and 62 degrees. Even with iron blue skies blocking the sun, the earth beneath his feet kept releasing stored warmth into the long tunnel, tempering the air before it reached his home. On the darkest days, he burned a small coal bed for cooking. Nothing more. The contrast was stark. While his neighbors burned through weeks of wood in days, he used barely a fraction of what he'd typically need. While frost crept across interior walls elsewhere, Garrett walked across dry floorboards in shirt sleeves. While other cabins filled with condensation that froze into brittle sheets, his remained warm and clean. He documented every hour, every temperature change, every shift inside and outside. His log entries looked like the notes of a scientist observing an unexpected triumph. When the cold deepened, his readings remained steady. 59 degrees, 61 degrees, collapse, never a crisis. The earth had become his furnace. The soil, the stone, the slope, the sunlight, everything worked together exactly as he had calculated. By the 6th day, exhausted neighbors appeared at his door. Their hands were cracked from wood cutting. Their voices wavered with fatigue. Their pride sat heavy in their eyes. "How?" they asked. "How did you stay warm? What did we miss? What exactly did you build under there?" He didn't boast. He simply opened the door and let them stand near the vent. The steady stream of tempered air said everything. In that moment, years of certainty about heat and home cracked like the stones in their frozen chimneys. When the roads finally reopened and the temperatures crept upward, the valley looked like a place that had survived a siege. Hearthstones were split. Chimneys stood crooked. Families emerged from their cabins wrapped in blankets, carrying the exhaustion of nights spent fighting a cold that refused to yield. And in the middle of that battered world stood one cabin that had stayed warm. Neighbors approached Garrett with quiet steps and humbled expressions. Some held hats to their chests. Some carried questions. All carried the memory of nights when their homes had nearly failed them. The same men who had once shouted jokes from their wagons now stood beside the hillside collector, studying the mica window they had mocked so freely. Pride had no room left to stand on. Tom Rigsby spoke first. "I thought you'd lost your mind," he said. "Turns out you saw something the rest of us didn't." Others followed. Questions about airflow, questions about gradients, questions about stone thickness and drainage, questions born not from ridicule, but from survival. Garrett explained without condescension. He showed them how the stone crown shed water, how the slopes created natural convection, how the mica collector warmed air before it entered the earth. He spoke like a man sharing a lesson, not claiming a victory. Word spread quickly. By the next winter, versions of his system appeared across the valley, some longer, some shorter, some with twin collectors. A stonemason near Craigsville built a 60-foot tunnel for a church hall. Another settler connected one to a root cellar, tempering both food storage and living space. People didn't call it engineering. They called it Elias's way. For decades, the tunnel beneath Garrett's cabin remained intact, a quiet tribute to a man who trusted what he observed more than what he was told. Long after modern heating replaced his system, the stone-lined passage rested beneath the soil, dry and stable. Only later would researchers realize how far ahead he had been. His design mirrored concepts that wouldn't receive formal names until the 20th century. Passive annual heat storage, thermal labyrinths ground to air heat transfer. The earth had been his thermal battery, the hillside his collector, the tunnel his heat exchanger. But Garrett never cared about recognition. He cared about resilience. He built something that outlasted a storm older methods could not survive. Something that protected his home when iron, coal, and oak failed. Something that proved innovation doesn't always come from textbooks. Sometimes it comes from a man with a shovel, a hillside, and a determination not to face death twice. If stories like this remind you that forgotten ingenuity still has lessons to teach us, consider joining us here on Winds of Thought. Your support helps keep these remarkable frontier stories alive. The cabin is gone now. The mica pane has long since disappeared. But deep beneath the hillside, Garrett's tunnel still rests, a quiet arc of stone that once saved a family during the coldest winter the valley had ever known, and the valley never laughed at it again.